Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani, and welcome back to this series that is really sort of a glossary, handbook, dictionary, call it what you will, of terms that are related to narcissism and narcissistic relationships. I had a couple of goals in mind for this series. One is just to create clarity, because many people read blogs and watch videos and may sometimes hear terms thrown around, but they're not sure what they're hearing. For example, things like flying monkeys and things like that. But also, some of you may not even have ever heard these terms, and they may give you some insight and some clarity on what these patterns are like. Today, we're going to talk about manipulation. Before we get that, I'm always going to invite you, please join this channel, hit the button that says subscribe, or hit the bell to get notifications, just to be able to get regular information about the content on this channel. So let's talk about manipulation. You know, it's interesting with manipulation. This is such a classical dynamic in all narcissistic, high conflict, difficult, and toxic relationships that I actually felt like this word deserved its own entry. And more than a few of you who've been sending in your comments have asked for this specific term. So here it is. So let's start with the dictionary definition of manipulation. The Oxford Dictionary defines manipulate as to control or influence a person or situation cleverly, unfairly, or unscrupulously. Manipulation, by definition, is self-serving. It is an act meant to achieve a goal that the manipulator wants for themselves and that may not be in your best interest. But instead of being transparent about what it is they want and why they need something from you or your help, they attempt to get your buy-in or influence you to support or give in to what it is they want by playing on your vulnerable emotions. What emotions do we have that make us prime for manipulation? Guilt, shame, obligation, low self-worth or low self-esteem, confusion, anxiety, fear, a feeling of being not good enough. By playing on these vulnerable spaces that all of us have, it's easy for a manipulative person to manipulate. And if a person is aware that you have a fear of separation or abandonment, then they will play upon that fear. And you may give in to them and what they want to avoid facing that uncomfortable feeling or fear. And that is often one of the most clear ways that manipulation works. It works with us because we want to avoid the thing that makes us uncomfortable, whatever that thing is. To me, guilt is in my opinion, is the uncomfortable feeling that people are most trying to avoid. So we go with what the manipulator wants, but sometimes we just don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to let them down. So examples of this could be things like, you don't want to feel guilty about sharing your feelings and causing more stress for the narcissist, or so the narcissist says, so you don't share your feelings. You don't bother them with the stuff in your life. You don't want the relationship to end or shift, and so the manipulator says, you know, I don't like you spending so much time with your friends or your family, so I don't know, you work a lot. This relationship may not be working for me, and voila! You stop spending time with friends as much, or family, or working towards your goal so you can avoid feeling that possibility that this relationship could end. In this way, manipulation is a way that somebody takes advantage of our vulnerabilities and our discomfort to set a precedent and then a pattern whereby the narcissistic person, the narcissistic pattern of a manipulative person playing upon this. Now, all of that falls under what I might call negative manipulation. Person manipulates us by playing upon our fears or vulnerabilities, even little things. Like I said, our fear of disappointing people or letting them down. It's a more sort of abusive, cruel, mean kind of manipulation. But there's also manipulation, I'm going to call it positive manipulation. It's not positive that it's happening, but it's sort of a fluffing up manipulation. What they may do is a narcissist may use flattery, and they may play upon those things with us, those things that flatter us. Now, this technique is more likely to come up during the love bombing phases and the honeymoon phases. They may compliment appearance. Ooh, looks like you've lost weight, or I like how your hair is now, you look sexy. Your knowledge, your expertise, your experience, they may compliment anything, but they do it in a way that gets them something they want. So let me give you a very, very simple example. They want to ride to the airport, and they'll say, you know, gosh, it's so amazing how nice and giving you are to other people. You are literally the sweetest person I have ever met. There aren't so many giving kind of angels amongst us, like amazing. You're like, okay, that's great. Thank you so much. And then a short time later, maybe a day or two, they're like, I hate to ask you this because you do so much for other people. Would you mind driving me to the airport? The Ubers, it's all a big problem. Now, obviously, that's a small example. In a more toxic manner, this can play out as complimenting you in a way that can pull you from doing things that matter to you or that leave you feeling confused about issues about which you may even be ambivalent or conflicted. So perhaps, let's see, maybe you wanted to maintain some part of a career after you had children, and you wanted to attempt to balance the two. But a narcissistic partner may recognize that you working after you have kids could potentially really inconvenience them. They may have to pitch in and also give them less control over you. So they may try a positive manipulation and say, wow, you are the most amazing mother. What a fantastic mother you are. How lucky is our baby that you're around them 24/7, giving them love and affection. You are so devoted that I would never want to imagine you'd ever want to spend time away from the baby. You deserve, you really deserve to spend years with the baby and to heal. And it never becomes a conversation about possibly maintaining part of your career. It's not a conversation. It's about them playing on your inner conflict, about wanting to be there for your child, but also your conflict about what your career means to you. And boom, they climb into that hole of cognitive dissonance and they turn it around. And at that point, you are already ambivalent. So it's very easy for them to step right in and turn the situation to what they want. Manipulators are masters of playing upon ambivalence in a way that many times you don't recognize as manipulation, but instead you may identify it as my internal confusion, internal ambivalence. But let me tell you what would have been healthy in this situation. In this situation, it would have been a very real and open and supportive conversation about what you both hope for your family. You may not even be in 100% agreement, but you may come to a compromise that accounts for both of you, rather than the manipulator being internally very clear on what he or she wants, you being at home so they don't need to ever be inconvenienced by childcare issues, and then playing upon your ambivalence to get what they want with the hope that you experience it as what you wanted and zero concern over your process and your hopes. So yeah, manipulation can either be positive, sort of fluffing you, or negative, sort of playing on your vulnerability. The positive, again, using compliments and praise to really sort of butter you up to get what they want. The negative being playing upon your guilt or other negative emotions or vulnerabilities or your negative self-concept. For example, your sense of not being enough or not wanting to disappoint people to get what they want. Now, manipulation is very frequently a feature of intimate and close relationships with narcissists. Now, and it tends to start really early in the relationship because there's sort of two pathways to manipulation that we've been talking about, the positive and the negative, the flattery versus playing on a person's vulnerabilities. Now, these patterns may evolve over the course of a toxic relationship cycle. Early on, if you have a love bombing phase, or at least the get acquainted phase, the narcissist is doing two things. They may be using love bombing and using flattery to playing on that to manipulate you, but they are also doing something else. This is also the mirroring and data gathering phase. When they are collecting information about your vulnerabilities, they start recognizing that you do struggle with guilt and not enoughness and indecisiveness and obligation and not wanting to let people down. And they are going to study that, and they're then going to be able to use it in their cruel manipulative processes. Now, anyone who has ever been in a close relationship with a narcissist, sort of a marriage, fiance, boyfriend, girlfriend, understands this fundamentally. Manipulation is a core dynamic in these relationships, and it is a primary contributor to the sort of the destabilization that comes from narcissistic abuse, because it leaves a person chronically confused, wondering if anything in the relationship is ever in their best interest. And here's the rub. Because manipulation is solely designed to forward what the manipulator wants, the only time it's going to be good for you as the manipulatee is those occasions when both of you, by sheer luck, just happen to have your interests and timing aligned. In other words, they are engaging in manipulative behavior, let's say to foster your agreement with something they want, but in some cases it may be exactly what you want too. That's not a healthy relationship. That's luck. Now, family manipulation manifests in so many ways, quite often and classically through triangulation. In a family system, the narcissist wants what he or she wants, and this is often apparent. So the entire family system becomes a bit of a chessboard or a puppet show in which the narcissist in charge is pulling the strings, and everyone is puppeteered as objects for the narcissist. As a child raised in this kind of a family system, you know this well. Their manipulation, the manipulation on behalf of your parents that your parents do, often means that you do not even know who you are, because having your own sense of self wasn't even permitted. You were almost raised to be a source of narcissistic supply or of scapegoating or of service for your parent. The opportunity for you to develop your sense of self as a unique, healthy person is totally going to get thwarted. Now, as you get older, you recognize this, and much of the struggle is to do the deep dive and figure out who you are away from the manipulation. But if you are stuck in that family dynamic, it can be very hard to distance yourself from the manipulative dynamic and figure out what it is you want, who you are, and what you are about. The manipulation in essence is using the members of the family to serve the narcissist's needs. And to me, this is one of the most damaging elements of the narcissistic family dynamic, because it almost robs some people of some sense of healthy identity. Now, in workplace settings, manipulation, whether from the management and leadership or from your colleagues, is a standard element of toxic workplaces. Now, it can take many forms, just as it does in close relationships or family relationships. Things could include fostering guilt to get staff to buy in on unpleasant tasks or additional workload. All right, gang, we are all in this together. I mean, we can handle those pay cuts, right? All the while, the administrators are getting well paid while you endure that pay cut. Or they butter you up as a pathway to make you work more hours, or suggesting that a promotion you get, they're going to give you a new title, but no more compensation. And then they'll tell you that this position is going to put you in place for bigger and better things down the line. So they're doing future faking. Manipulative leaders learn their staff's and their employees' vulnerabilities, and they often exploit them. Manipulative workplaces are also really triangulated, and some people in these workplaces benefit a lot more than other people, often because the ones who get ahead are the ones that are the best at fluffing up the narcissistic boss. So now we've already talked about it in this series, so I'm not going to belabor it, but gaslighting is the ultimate manipulation. Denying someone's reality is a manipulation designed to destabilize them, confuse them, and often results in the gaslighted person just giving in from a place of confusion, self-doubt, helplessness, or hopelessness. Gaslighting can kind of be nested under manipulation. Not all manipulation is gaslighting, but all gaslighting is manipulation. So this goes into a bit of a philosophical question. It's one I actually struggle with even with my students and sometimes with my clients. If a person is not intentionally or consciously manipulating, is it still manipulation? Now this is a tough one. First of all, there is no way to really know. We have to trust the truth of the manipulator, and we already know that they're not good truth tellers, or let's just say it, they often lie. They're not going to come out and say, yeah, I was intentionally manipulating you. When we talk not just about narcissism, but about all of the high conflict, antagonistic, and difficult personality styles that all hang out together, and these things all together are often collectively termed, it's an old school term, but they're collectively termed cluster B patterns. All of these patterns all show a lack of social and interpersonal skills. These are people who are not particularly good at empathy, not particularly good at intimacy, not particularly good at self-reflection. There's a selfishness to these cluster B patterns in which they're sort of single-mindedly focused on doing what works for them with little regard for other people. But this lack of social skill, of not being able to understand the back and forth or the reciprocity of human relationship, can mean that they're going to do and they're going to say whatever they need to do to serve themselves. Now, manipulation gets tricky because we have to, at some level, own our part in it. Now, I am not, and I do not want to engage in blaming the victim here. So I'm sort of walking in a tricky space here. But the fact is all of us have elements. Our propensity for guilt, our sense of hope, our normal human appreciation for being validated, that can leave us more vulnerable to being manipulated. So when a person engages in some kind of passive-aggressive prattle about something, I don't know, coming to a work event or working late on a deadline or loaning someone money, when they go on about some of these things and get very passive-aggressive in those spaces, it can thrum on our ancient scripts of issues such as guilt. Oh, okay, sure, I'll give you money, but I struggle a lot too. And then the difficult personality plays upon those less than healthy parts of us: guilt, obligation, misplaced sense of duty. And that's when it becomes the perfect storm. The manipulator meets the manipulatable, and I think most of us are manipulatable. But let's go back to the philosophical question. Does it matter if it is intentional or not? I'm going to be frank with you. If you ask enough psychologists, you're going to get an entire range of opinions. In some ways, we're never going to find out if it's intentional. So all we can do is look for patterns. People who are not self-reflective and who have very variable empathy and who are not interpersonally wise may easily engage in behavior that feels manipulative. However, if you clearly communicate with someone and they take responsibility and stop and catch themselves, I don't know, maybe that doesn't qualify as manipulation. They themselves may acknowledge that they learned some of these manipulative patterns in childhood and they fall back on them. But that if it's not consistently a pattern and a genuine intentional effort is made to change it, it's actually not likely to be the kind of antagonistic manipulation we observe in a pattern such as narcissism. Narcissistic manipulation is not going to go away. In fact, it may be the one pattern that is the most resistant to change. So why do narcissists manipulate? I mean, at a core level, it is a manifestation, as I noted earlier in this particular video, it's a manifestation of their inability to communicate clearly within the context of a relationship and their anxious need to protect their core insecurity and address their own needs first. There's a certain lack of trust that the narcissistic personality style has with the world at large. So manipulation allows them to control the narrative. Instead of having to trust someone to do the right thing or agree to do something, they maintain control, which is very important for them to maintain control, by setting things up in a way that will result in exactly the outcome that they want or that they need. Manipulation works when you don't care about another person. It's disrespectful. And narcissistic personalities have so much contempt for close relationships that their disrespect is manifested through manipulation. I mean, the fact is, manipulation is an acknowledgement that another person is merely an object by which to get things done, or an impediment or a barrier to be removed. Now, sadly, people who grow up in narcissistic family environments often learn manipulation as one of the only ways to actually be in a relationship. And even healthy people from these families of origin may need to sort of unlearn manipulation as a way of interacting with people. We do what we're brought up with. It's hard sometimes to undo those patterns. Manipulation feels awful when it happens to us. We feel played, we feel disrespected, but manipulation also plays on our own negative emotions and our own vulnerabilities. So we have to balance boundary setting and saying no in the face of the manipulation. And then we have to endure the uncomfortable emotions that manipulation raises, such as guilt. Now, manipulation honestly raises the biggest issue for boundary setting or even walking away from narcissistic relationships. People just don't know how to do it because they're confused. Now, we may recognize that the narcissistic relationship and the manipulation are all unhealthy, but our discomfort over feeling guilty can keep us stuck. And in that way, for reasons that aren't always clear, people choose resentment, I'm going to stay in this, over guilt. Neither one feels good, but for some reason, people often choose resentment and stay in the relationship, which sadly over time can leave you feeling like a victim. Now, manipulation is a classical dynamic in all high conflict and antagonistic relationships and a fixture in narcissistic relationships. I've actually never heard of the narcissistic relationship dynamic without it. In many ways, manipulation is the language that they speak. And as a result, you have to fall back on the tried and true strategies of realistic expectations, radical acceptance, not engaging, not explaining, and setting boundaries while doing a deep dive into yourself, learning yourself, and starting to identify issues like your guilt, your need to please other people as a barrier that you can address. We already know that narcissists do not respect boundaries. But if you can get a handle on some of the stuff that keeps you stuck, like guilt, or a distorted sense of duty and obligation, or false narratives and fear, you can start learning the superpower of avoiding manipulation and doing it with compassion and with grace. Sometimes, quite often actually, no is the hardest word to say, and yet it may save your life. Manipulation is really one of those the most challenging dynamic in narcissistic relationships. And many people have to see it happen hundreds, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of times to really recognize it for what it is and finally set the real boundaries or step away from the relationship as a means to their own survival. I hope that this video clarified some of your thinking on manipulation. And as always, please subscribe to this channel to get regular content like this, and hit that bell, get notifications every time we put out a new video. Thanks again. Thanks again. Thanks again.